The storm had clawed across the plains all night, fierce and mean, like it was looking to pick a fight. Lightning cracked the sky wide open, and for a moment the whole world was lit in bone-white silence. Then, darkness again, just the wind, the rain, and the slow creak of the barn roof straining under it all. Thatcher Cole didn't sleep much, not since the funeral. He kept to himself on 200 acres of dry land and ghosts, a rifle always within arm's reach, and the doors all bolted. Folks down in Crosswind said he'd gone half wild, something more shadow than man. So when a noise echoed from the hayloft just past midnight, he thought it might be a raccoon, maybe a drifter, or worse, one of those hired boys looking to test. An old cowboy's nerve. But what he found was a woman. She was curled up in the hay like a broken bird, wedding dress torn at the hem, veil ripped, clutching a Bible like it was the only thing keeping her from coming apart. She looked up at him, eyes wide and hollow with a kind of fear that came from more than the storm. June Everly didn't belong to the wind or the rain. She belonged to someone cruel, someone rich, someone on his way to take her back, and for reasons Thatcher didn't fully understand, maybe mercy, maybe memory. He stepped into her story without asking what it would cost. By the time the sun rose over Crosswind, the lawmen were coming, marriage papers in hand, fists and rifles behind them. But the cowboy was already standing in the barn doorway, voice low and steady as thunder rolled behind him. "She ain't yours," he said. "She's mine now." The wind howled like a wounded thing across the coal ranch, dragging dust and grit in its teeth. Thunder rattled the windows of the old house, and the front porch creaked as though it, too, remembered better days. The world outside had turned black and bruised with rain, the kind that pelted the tin roof so hard it drowned out thought. Thatcher Cole sat alone in the kitchen, the dim lamp above the table casting long shadows across the walls. A tin cup of coffee steamed in front of him, untouched, already cooling. He stared at the flames in the stove, his thoughts not in the room, but somewhere years behind him, where the cries of a woman in labor echoed against barn walls, followed by silence too loud to bear. That was the last time he prayed. Now he let the wind do the speaking. The house was quiet save for the wind and the low creak of old timber. No radio, no dog, no horses, just the stubborn heartbeat of a man who decided to outlive the world. That was when he heard it, a thud above the ceiling. Not the groan of wood or the storm battering the roof. This was something different, something alive. Thatcher didn't flinch, just stood, slow and deliberate, and reached for the Colt Peacemaker sitting on the shelf. He'd kept it loaded even after the horses were sold, even after the barn doors rotted off their hinges. Old habits died slower than love. He moved like a man with nowhere to be and no one left to rush for. The wind pulled at the back door as he stepped into the rain, the hem of his long duster flapping like a warning flag. Lightning lit up the landscape in frozen silver. The barn, a skeleton of its former self, stood crooked and defiant. He crossed the mud and climbed the ladder into the hayloft without a word. At first, he saw nothing, just shadows and hay, and the scent of dust soaked in time. Then, movement. A figure huddled in the corner, half buried beneath straw and tarp. White dress, soaked and clinging to her, like second skin. Bare shoulders shivering in the cold. One hand clutched a Bible. The other clutched nothing at all. "Don't shoot," the woman said, voice barely louder than the rain. Thatcher didn't lower the gun, but his finger eased off the trigger. "Name," he said. "June," she whispered. "June Everly." Her lips trembled with the effort. "I'll go. Just needed a place to stop." He didn't answer, just looked at her, soaked to the bone, mud on her knees, veil torn clean in half, a cut on her lip, no shoes. The rain pounded louder on the roof as if waiting for his verdict. Instead, he spoke low. "You got a weapon on you?" She shook her head. He lowered the pistol. "Come down." She didn't move. "I won't hurt you," he added, as if the words still carried weight from a man like him. That seemed to do it. She rose on shaky legs, slipping once on the wet straw. He reached out instinctively, catching her by the elbow. Her skin was cold and damp, the bones beneath it sharp. "Come on," he said. "You'll freeze up here." Inside the house, he lit the stove higher and gave her an old flannel shirt that hung from a nail. She sat at the kitchen table while he poured coffee into a second cup. Her hand shook as she held it. He didn't ask questions. Not yet, just sat across from her and waited. She took a sip, flinched, then set the cup down. "I was supposed to marry a man today," she said. "Didn't even know him. My aunt arranged it. He's rich, older, owned half the cattle east of Crosswind. Said it was a good match." She looked down at the cup. "He hit me before the vows, just a slap. But it said everything I needed to know." Thatcher leaned back in the chair, boots heavy on the wood. "So I ran," she continued. "Took the horse from the stable. Didn't even take my shoes. Rode till the horse gave out. Walked till I saw your barn light." He nodded once. Not judging. "Just listening. You gonna send me back?" she asked, voice suddenly sharp with panic. To him, Thatcher's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "Ain't my business to send a woman somewhere she don't want to be." June blinked, eyes glossy. She looked around the room, plain, dusty, quiet. The kind of house where no one laughed. But it felt safe. "You live alone?" she asked. "Long. Time now. Why?" He didn't answer. She didn't push. An hour passed. The rain softened, but the wind did not. June stood by the window, looking out at the night. Her wedding dress hung limp from her frame. The lace had torn at the hips and mud darkened the hem. He watched her in the reflection of the stove glass. "You should get some rest," he said. She turned. "Where?" "Couch is yours." "I'll sit here." She hesitated, then nodded. She curled up on the couch with a blanket, clutching the Bible like a talisman. He stayed in his chair by the stove, one hand on his rifle, eyes on the door. At some point, her breathing slowed. She was asleep. Thatcher didn't sleep, not even a little. At dawn, he stepped out onto the porch and saw the dust trail. Riders. 4 of them, maybe 5. Coming fast. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, then snuffed it out. Time to make a choice. Inside, June was stirring. She sat up, eyes wide. "They're here," he said. She nodded slowly, resigned. "Do I run?" He shook his head. "You won't make it far." She swallowed hard. "Then what?" He looked at her for a long beat, then moved to a drawer, pulled out a folded piece of paper and a small ink pen. June watched, confused. He wrote something, signed it, then handed her the pen. She read the top line. "Marriage declaration. Date. Names. Witness. None." Her hands trembled. "You sure?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I ain't letting them drag you back." She signed it. The pen scratched over the paper like thunder on the plains. Then he took her hand and slid a simple silver ring onto her finger. It was worn, a little tarnished, his late wife's. June didn't ask, just nodded. Outside, the horses were slowing. Boots hit dirt. Thatcher stepped outside. The man who dismounted first wore a black coat and a red vest. His mustache was waxed, and his eyes carried the cruelty of someone used to getting his way. "Cole," the man said, his voice like oil on gravel. "We're here for what's ours." Thatcher stood on the porch, arms loose, coat unbuttoned, just enough to show the handle of his Colt. "She ain't yours anymore," he said. "You hiding her?" "I married her." The men behind him stirred. One laughed, short and mean. Man in the vest sneered. "You married a runaway? That makes you a thief." "No," Thatcher said. "That makes her free." The man's jaw clenched. "You got papers?" Thatcher held up the declaration. "Signed. Legal enough. Judge in town can argue with me if he wants." A tense silence followed. Then the man stepped forward. "She belongs with me," he said. "She was promised." "She ain't livestock," Thatcher said. "And this ain't a sale." "Then you best get off that porch." Thatcher smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I wouldn't try. The wind picked up, whipping dust through the yard. June stepped into the doorway behind him, face pale but calm. The ring on her finger gleamed in the sun. The men saw it. So did the man in the vest. He paused, then turned to his riders. "We'll be back," he said. "I'll be here," Thatcher replied. They rode off in silence. Back inside, June collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. "You okay?" Thatcher asked. She nodded. "Barely. You didn't have to." "I did," he said. "You'll see." She looked at him for a long time. "What happens now?" He took off his hat, set it on the table. "Now," he said, "we see what tomorrow looks like." June woke to silence, not the kind you find in a church or a graveyard, but a heavier kind, the hush that settles after a decision has been made, the kind that comes just before a man draws his gun or a woman walks out the door forever. The wind had calmed. The storm was gone. But the air inside Thatcher Cole's house still felt thick, like the rain had left something behind. She sat up slowly on the couch, flannel shirt still wrapped around her. The blanket had slipped during the night, and a faint ache pressed behind her eyes. She touched the ring on her finger. Simple, cool, real. Thatcher was already up. She could hear the slow scrape of metal outside, the sound of a shovel breaking earth. Not hurried, not violent, just steady. She stepped outside barefoot, blinking into the pale morning light. He was digging a post hole out near the front gate, shirt sleeves rolled, hat tilted low. The rifle leaned within reach. "What are you doing?" she called. He didn't. "Look up." Putting up a sign, she stepped closer, arms folded tight across her borrowed shirt. "What kind of sign?" Thatcher glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "One that says, 'This land's mine, and she's mine too.'" A flush crept up her neck. "You don't have to do that," he didn't argue. Just kept digging. She stepped back, unsure what to do with the quiet defiance of the man in front of her. Every move he made said he didn't care what the world thought. And yet here he was, carving boundaries into the earth for a woman he hadn't known 2 days. She turned and went back inside. There were still traces of another life in the Wood house. The wedding photo on the mantel. A young woman with sharp eyes and a softer smile, standing beside a man who looked like Thatcher, only younger and not quite so haunted. A pair of knitting needles in a jar, dusty and forgotten. An old baby blanket, folded neatly and packed into a cedar chest. June didn't touch any of it. She made coffee instead, found the beans, the pot, the stove. When Thatcher returned, sweat clinging to his temples, she handed him a cup. He accepted it with a nod. "I'm not going to pretend," she said after a moment. "I don't know what this is." He sipped slowly. "Neither do I. But you stood up for me. That means something." Thatcher stared into his coffee. "You needed help. I had space." June gave a sad smile. "That's not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It ain't?" They sat on the porch for a while after that, neither speaking much, just watching the road, waiting to see if it kicked up dust again. But the land was still. The horses, 2 Thatcher had hidden in a side paddock, he never mentioned, snorted from behind the barn, uneasy but alive. June turned the ring on her finger. Who did it belong to? He followed her gaze, then looked away. "My wife, Eliza." She hesitated. "She passed?" 6 years, complications with birth. He didn't say more. "Didn't have to. I'm sorry." Thatcher nodded once, but the muscles in his jaw clenched. June studied him then, not just his face, but the way he carried himself. Quiet strength, a sadness so deep it no longer wept, just waited. And something else, something buried under all that silence. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked finally. "I'll go if this was just a thing you did to keep them off your land." He looked at her hard. "You want to leave?" She blinked, surprised by his tone. I don't know." "Then stay until you do." He said it like a fact, not a plea. Like the door was open, but he wasn't standing in it to push her out. June nodded, swallowed hard, and whispered, Okay. Later, she found herself in the barn, brushing down one of the horses, a mare with a lazy eye and a stubborn streak. The work steadied her, hands moving over muscle and hide, the rhythm of it sinking into her bones. She didn't hear Thatcher enter until he spoke behind her. "You ride?" She nodded. "My father was a mule trader, not rich, but we rode every week." "Good." He leaned against a beam, arms crossed. "Might need to know how, in case they come back." June's hand stilled. "You think they will?" Thatcher didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a bundle, clothes, a cotton dress, boots worn but solid, a shawl that still smelled faintly of lavender. She looked at him, stunned. "You kept these?" "Eliza's. Thought about burning them once." "Couldn't." June ran her fingers over the fabric. "Are you sure?" She would have wanted them used, not buried. She swallowed again, harder this time. That night June stood on the back porch, the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The wind had returned, but not as angry. It whispered now instead of howling. She looked out across the ranch, to the fence line Thatcher had started mending, to the stars overhead, to the soft flicker of lamplight in the kitchen where he sat. Reading an old ledger, his brow furrowed. She didn't love him, not yet, but something in her wanted to try. Back in town, Cyrus Bell, her would-be husband, wasn't taking the loss well. The judge had warned him. "She's married now," the old man said, fanning himself on the porch of the crosswind courthouse. "Paper says Cole signed it. If he's lying, that's a civil matter. You try to drag her back, it becomes criminal." "I paid for her," Cyrus snarled. "She ain't livestock," the judge snapped. "She's a citizen. You want satisfaction." "Take it to court," Cyrus spat on the boards. "No court ever did me any good." He stormed off. His men followed. 2 days passed. The dust settled. The skies stayed dry. June cooked. Thatcher fixed the roof on the chicken coop. They barely spoke, but the silence felt different now, companionable. She caught him watching her once, not with hunger or possession, but with curiosity, like he was trying to remember how to hope. One evening after supper, he handed her a box. Inside was a silver locket. She opened it, a picture on one side, Eliza, young and fierce. The other side, empty. "I don't need this," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but maybe one day you'll put something in it." She held it to her chest. "Thank you." That night she dreamed of boots on the porch and a fist pounding the door, and when she woke, they were there. The knock wasn't polite. It was the kind that rattled the hinges, the kind that didn't wait for an invitation. Thatcher was already out of bed by the second thud, the rifle in his hand before his feet touched the floorboards. June sat upright, on the couch, breath caught, eyes wide in the lamplight. "Stay back," he murmured. She nodded. Thatcher moved like a man who'd done this before. No panic, just purpose. He crossed the room and stood by the door, not in front of it. His voice, when it came, was steel. "Who is it?" a voice answered, slurred with whiskey and full of venom. "Cyrus Bell. I came for what's mine." Behind him came the sound of hooves shifting, saddles creaking, multiple riders, probably armed. Thatcher didn't open the door. "She's not yours." A heavy pause. "Then we'll burn the place and pick through the ashes." June pressed a hand to her mouth. Thatcher's voice didn't rise. "You do that, and you won't make it back to town." No response. Then, "You threatening me, Cole? I'm telling you what'll happen." The door shook with another blow, but didn't give. June stepped forward. "They'll kill you." Thatcher looked at her. His face was calm. "Let me worry about that." She moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. 4 of them, maybe 5, 2 with rifles. One's got a lantern. Thatcher moved to the table, grabbed the papers, the marriage declaration, and tucked them into his coat. Then he checked the rifle, loaded 6 rounds, and handed her the shotgun, leaning against the stove. "You ever use one?" She nodded. "Once. My father taught me to shoot snakes near the woodpile. Then aim for legs, if they get through." He stepped out onto the porch. The morning was just beginning to peel the dark off the sky. A faint orange glow touched the rim of the world, silhouetting the men at the edge of the yard. 5 riders, 1 lantern swinging low, 1 man on foot, boots planted in the dust like a challenge. Cyrus Bell looked like a banker dressed for war. Clean, black coat, polished boots, and a silver ring on every finger. But the way his lip curled gave him away. He wasn't here for justice. He was here for possession. "You've got 5 seconds to give her up," he called. Thatcher stepped off the porch. The rifle rested loose in his hand, pointed down, but not idle. "She's not a horse. She don't get handed over. You married her just to spit in my eye." "No," Thatcher said. "I married her so she wouldn't have to look at yours ever again." That got a murmur from the men behind Cyrus. One shifted in his saddle. Cyrus narrowed his eyes. "You're gonna regret this." Thatcher looked at the sky, as if measuring how much regret he could afford. "I already regret plenty," he said. "But this? No, this I'll stand by." Inside, June paced. The shotgun felt too heavy, too real. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. She heard the voices, heard Cyrus, heard Thatcher's calm, unshaken replies. She stepped to the window again. Saw them, 5 armed men against 1 cowboy with a battered rifle, and nothing left to do. Blues. But it wasn't nothing, was it? She wasn't nothing. June swallowed hard and went to the kitchen drawer. She pulled out a box of shells, loaded 2 into the shotgun's chamber, and clicked it shut with hands steadier than she expected. Outside, Cyrus dismounted. His boots struck the earth with a practiced arrogance. He stepped closer, just past the hitching post. "You think 1 rifle's going to stop us?" he asked. "No," Thatcher said. "But I think the first man who moves dies where he stands." Cyrus smirked. "That's supposed to scare me?" "It's not for you," Thatcher said. "It's for them." The riders shifted again, less certain. Now. One looked toward the hills. One spat and muttered something under his breath. Cyrus snarled, "They don't move without me." "Then you better think real hard before you do." Then the front door creaked open. June stepped out. The shotgun was in her hands, not raised, but not hiding either. The men stared. She looked at Cyrus and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "I'm not your property. You hit me before the vows. You think you own me because you bought a dress and paid my aunt." She paused. "I'd rather die on this porch than go back with you." Cyrus turned red. "You little—" Thatcher raised his rifle slightly. "Watch." "Your mouth," June's voice cracked, but didn't falter. "I signed the papers. I signed them because this man gave me shelter and dignity, and if the law don't like that, let the law come. But you ain't dragging me nowhere." The wind picked up again, sweeping through the dust and silence. Then one of the riders turned his horse. "Cyrus, this ain't worth it." Another followed. "You said it'd be clean," Cyrus growled. "Cowards." "You said she was taken," the second rider muttered. "Didn't say she chose someone else." Cyrus reached for his revolver. Thatcher lifted his rifle. "Don't," he said. Cyrus froze. June stared at him. "Go home," she said. One by one the riders peeled away, even the one holding the lantern. Finally it was just Cyrus. Dust swirling around his polished boots. His hand hovered near his hip. "You got no idea who you're messing with," he said, low. Thatcher's eyes narrowed. "You're not worth the bullet." That stung. Cyrus turned sharply, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. The porch exhaled with them. Thatcher leaned the rifle against the wall. June lowered the shotgun slowly, her arms shaking now that the danger was gone. She looked at him. "You meant it?" He tilted his head. "When you said I wasn't worth the bullet?" He gave the faintest smile. "Figured the dust'd take him before I needed to." She laughed then, just once, sharp and sudden, and it startled both of them. Later, after the sun had fully risen, June helped Thatcher finish the sign. It stood at the gate now, carved with a hand that hadn't written anything in years. Cole Ranch, no trespassing. Below that, etched in deeper cuts, married 1878, Cole and Everly. She traced the letters with her finger. You didn't have to add my name. I did. She looked up. You know this isn't over, right? I know. They'll come back. Cyrus. Won't take this lightly. I hope he takes it far, Thatcher said. Inside, she made them eggs, burned the first batch, got the second right. He ate without complaint. They didn't talk much, but the silence had changed again. It was starting to feel like something you could build on. Later that night, Thatcher sat in the rocker by the fireplace, one boot resting on his knee, sharpening a knife. June stood by the doorway, watching the light flicker across his face. Thank you, she said. He didn't look up. For what? For choosing to stand with me, he paused, then looked at her. You weren't the only one who needed a reason. It rained again that night. Not like the storm that brought June to the ranch, this one came soft and steady, the kind of rain that made the dirt sigh and the roof whisper. The air smelled of wet sage and old wood, and for once it didn't carry the weight of threat. Thatcher Cole sat on the front porch, one leg hooked over the railing, the same battered hat pulled low over his brow. The shotgun rested beside the chair, but his hand didn't hover near it. For once he let it be. Inside, June moved with careful rhythm. She'd cleaned the kitchen, washed the windows, repaired a torn curtain with thread she found in a rusted tin. She worked not because she had to, but because she needed to make something hers, something clean, something not borrowed from someone else's grief. Thatcher watched her through the doorway. She moved differently now, less like someone running, more like someone pausing just long enough to think about staying. When she noticed him looking, she held his gaze a moment longer than she had before, then looked away and returned to her stitching. Later, over supper, they sat together without speaking for a long time. June finally broke the silence. Your wife, Eliza, what was she like? Thatcher didn't answer right away. He finished chewing, set down his fork, and leaned back in his chair. Stubborn, he said, liked lilacs, could shoot better than I could, but pretended she couldn't. He looked out the window. She didn't want kids, not at first. Said the world was mean, and she'd seen too much of it. June studied him. But you did. I did. He smiled barely, and when she finally agreed, it killed her. June's heart tugged in her chest. I'm sorry, he nodded once. Slow. Me too. She hesitated, then reached across the table and set her hand near his. Not touching, just close. Thatcher didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. The next morning the sun broke clean through the clouds. Everything shimmered. Even the barn, with its half-collapsed roof, seemed to hold itself straighter. Thatcher saddled the mare and led her into the yard. Need supplies, he said. June blinked. You're going to town? He nodded. We're short on beans, flour, lamp oil. Can't live on dried meat and rainwater. I can go with you, she offered. He paused. They'll talk. I know. They'll look. I know, she said again, firmer this time. A beat. Then he tied down the second saddle. They rode into Crosswind just after noon. The town didn't stop moving, but it did slow. Eyes turned, voices dropped. Men outside the barber shop leaned, a little too far into their chairs. Women at the general store watched June dismount, with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Thatcher didn't flinch, just helped her down and walked inside. It was quiet in the store. Old Mr. Dobson, behind the counter, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Beans, Thatcher said, 5 pounds, flour, coffee, matches. Dobson started measuring, hands quick, eyes sharp. You ain't been in town since the spring flood, he said. Didn't need to be. Now you bring a woman with you. Dobson glanced at June. This her? She's got a name. June stepped forward. June Everly Cole. Dobson blinked at the last word. That so? It is? Dobson nodded slowly. Then welcome. Mrs. Cole. Don't mind the stairs. Folks around here ain't seen change in a long while. June gave a small smile. I've had my fill of stairs. Thatcher paid in coin. No haggling. Back outside, they loaded the supplies in silence. Thatcher tied down the sacks. June adjusted the basket of matches and flour. Just as she finished, she heard the voice. "Well, well?" Cyrus Bell stood across the road, thumbs hooked in his vest, boots polished. He looked like a man who thought he still had the upper hand, even with the bruises of loss still visible in the tightness around his eyes. "I heard you were back in town," he said. "Didn't think you'd show your face so soon." Thatcher didn't look at him. "Don't talk unless you want to reply," Cyrus smirked. "Just checking in on what used to be mine." June's hand curled into a fist. She stepped forward. "I was never yours." Cyrus's grin slipped. "You might have tricked a broken-down rancher into marrying you, but you and I both know—" Thatcher's hand shot out. He grabbed Cyrus by the vest, yanked him forward, and whispered something no one else could hear. Whatever it was, it turned Cyrus pale. He backed away without a word, straightened his coat, and walked off stiffly toward the saloon. June looked at Thatcher. "What did you say?" He mounted the horse. "I told him next time he calls you anything but your name." "I'll bury him without a sermon." June swallowed hard, then climbed up beside him. They didn't speak again until the ranch house was in sight. That night, June took the baby blanket out of the cedar chest, sat by the fire, fingers smoothing the soft blue fabric. She didn't ask for permission, and Thatcher didn't stop her. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He took a moment to answer. "After Eliza died, I rode for 3 days. Got as far as Red Bend, looked west, thought about crossing the desert. Why didn't you?" He shrugged. "Ran out of reasons, turned around." She nodded. "I did the opposite," she said. "Ran until I had no place left to go." He glanced at her. "Well," he said, "now you've got one." A week passed. They fell into a rhythm. June kept the house warm and clean. She planted small things in the cracked soil near the back fence. Onions, sage, carrots. Thatcher repaired fence lines, replaced the broken pane in the upstairs window, sharpened tools, rebuilt the saddle rack. They didn't talk about love. They didn't need to. But the silence between them was changing, becoming a space that held more than grief. One morning, Thatcher brought her a flower. Not store-bought, not even whole. Just a wild bloom he'd found near the creek bed, bent from the wind, but still. Hanging on, she took it with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, awkward. "It reminded me of you," he muttered. She blinked. "Because it's wild?" "No," he said. "Because it's still standing." That night, June lit the lamp beside the bed and stared at the locket, Eliza's face inside, and the empty half next to it. She took a small photo from her satchel, one of her and her father, folded it gently, placed it inside, then she snapped it shut. The fire started just after midnight, not in the house, not in the barn, but out at the edge of the fence line, just enough distance that Thatcher didn't see it at first, just smelled it. The scent of smoke threading through the open bedroom window like a warning. He was out of bed in a flash, pulling on boots, grabbing the rifle from the corner. June stirred as the screen door slapped shut behind him. The blaze had taken hold of the far fence post, dry and splintered. The flames licked higher with the wind, turning orange against the night sky. Thatcher grabbed the pump and ran the hose out across the field. The water pressure was low. It always had been. He cursed under his breath and slapped the nozzle against his palm, coaxing more out. The fire hissed when the water hit, but it didn't die right away. It fought back, greedy, alive. June appeared at his side with a wet burlap sack and beat at the edges, her dress catching stray embers that she patted out with shaking hands. "Go back inside," Thatcher barked. "No." She didn't flinch, just slammed the sack down again and again, her face grim, smoke in her hair. They got it out after 20 minutes. The grass was scorched, the post blackened to the roots. They stood over it, breath ragged. Thatcher turned, scanning the dark. "Tracks," he said. He crouched low. There were boot prints, faint but clear, coming in from the west fence line, then pulling away. June knelt beside him. "Cyrus?" Or one of his men. She touched her throat. "They tried to scare us." He stood slowly, looking towards the Ars hills. "No, they're testing how far I'll go to protect you." They didn't sleep the rest of the night. June sat by the cold stove with the shotgun across her knees. Thatcher patrolled the property, rifle slung, boots silent against the packed dirt. When dawn came, it was red, the kind of red that promises more than sunrise. Later that morning, Thatcher rode into town, alone. He found the sheriff leaning against the front post of the jailhouse, chewing on tobacco and pretending not to notice the scar on Thatcher's cheek. "You got something to say, Cole?" "Yeah," Thatcher said. "My fence got lit up last night." The sheriff nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Flames high? High enough to wake the dead?" The sheriff spit into the dust. "You think it was Belle?" "I think you already." "No, it was." "Look," the sheriff sighed, "I don't want no trouble between you two. The town's quiet these days." "Too quiet," Thatcher said, "like it's holding its breath." The sheriff rubbed his eyes. "Cole, I know Belle's dangerous, but I ain't got proof, and I ain't risking my deputies on what-ifs." "You won't have to." "That a threat?" "It's a promise," Thatcher said. "You tell him, next time he sets foot on my land, I won't be putting out fires." Back at the ranch, June stood near the fence post, staring at the charred wood. She thought of her father, how he used to say, "A man who starts a fire is either cold or angry, and if he ain't cold, best keep your back to the wind." Well, she could feel the wind now, and it wasn't just at her back. It was circling. She turned when she heard the hooves. Thatcher rode in hard, dust spraying from the horse's hooves. His jaw was tight. "Nothing from the law?" He shook his head. "Cowards!" "What now?" He looked at the hills. "We prepare." The next 2 days passed in a kind of quiet war. Thatcher reinforced the barn doors, recut fence posts, dug out the rifle he hadn't touched in years, an old Spencer repeater with the stock worn smooth from Eliza's hands. June made jars of salted meat, packed them into the cellar. She dug out the old quilt from the chest and stitched it stronger. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Every act was its own prayer. One evening, Thatcher found her out behind the chicken, Co-op staring up at the sky. "You believe in God?" he asked. June didn't turn. "Some days." "This one of 'em," she nodded. "He didn't leave me in that church with Cyrus. He got me here." Thatcher stepped beside her. "You ever think maybe it was you that got you here?" She smiled. Faintly. Maybe it was both. That night they ate in silence until June spoke. "You never asked what happened to my folks. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She folded her hands. "They were good people, simple. My father traded mules. My mother sang in church, kept chickens, made the best peach jam this side of the river." She swallowed. Then came the sickness. Took them both within a month. Thatcher nodded, quiet. "My aunt took me in, not because she wanted to, because the town said she had to. She dressed me up, marched me in front of suitors. Cyrus was the richest. That was enough for her." "And for you?" June looked up. "It was a cage, gilded, but still a cage." Thatcher stared into the fire. "Ain't nothing worse than being owned." "No," she whispered. "There ain't." They didn't touch. Not yet. But that night she slept in the room across from his, and for the first time the door was left ajar. In crosswind, Cyrus stood in the back room of the saloon staring at the map spread across the poker table. "Cole's got a stream," one of his men said. "Freshwater? Still running." "I know. He's also got the ridge. Overlooks the valley." "I know that, too." The man hesitated. "You planning to take it?" Cyrus looked up, eyes dark. "I ain't planning to take land," he said. "I'm planning to take back what made me look weak." "Her?" "No," Cyrus said coldly. "Control." The wind picked up again the next morning. It whistled through the trees like a warning. The sky stayed blue, but the air felt tight, like thunder had pulled its fist back and was waiting for the right moment to strike. Thatcher cleaned his rifle on the porch. June made bread with the last of the flour. They didn't say it, but both felt the shift. Trouble wasn't coming. It was already here, and it had lit the first match. The land beyond the Cole Ranch wasn't marked on any paper, no signposts, no trails, just dust, rock, and the stubborn growth of mesquite trees clawing at the sky like they were asking why it hadn't rained. It was the kind of land where men went to disappear or to make sure someone else did, and that morning June woke with a chill in her bones. Not from cold, but instinct. A thread pulled too tight, a breath that wouldn't settle. She rose before dawn, wrapped her shawl tight, and walked barefoot to the porch. The horizon was still a bruise, the stars beginning to bleed into it. Thatcher was already there, sharpening his knife with slow, even strokes. She studied his silhouette. Still focused, calm, the way only a man who'd faced death before could be. There was a rifle beside him, a cup of coffee gone cold, and the scent of fresh saddle leather in the air. "You feel it too?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up. "Yeah." By noon the chickens were restless. The horses kicked more than usual. One of the mares whinnied at the fence, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. Thatcher went to the barn, checked the tack, ran his fingers over the latch. June followed, clutching a folded piece of paper, a note she'd been rewriting over and over again. "If something happens," she said, "I want someone to know what you did for me." He took the paper from her hand, crumpled it, and tossed it aside. "No one's dying today." "You don't know that. I know what I'll do to keep it from happening." June stared at him, jaw set. "You can't stop everything with a rifle." "No," he said, "but I can buy time, buy distance, and maybe that's enough." That afternoon, a rider came, alone, dust on his coat, hat pulled low, a telegram in his hand. Thatcher stepped down from the porch to meet him. June stayed in the shadow of the door. The rider handed over the slip of paper. "From the sheriff, he's resigning." Thatcher blinked. "What?" "Too much heat. Town council's bending to Cyrus. They told him to stay out of ranch disputes, so he quit." The rider shifted in the saddle. "He told me to tell you, don't trust no badge that gets polished with money." Then he rode out. "East, I think." Thatcher read the telegram. Simple. 6 words. "You're on your own now, Cole." He looked up at the rider. "You want a bells?" "No," the man said, "just someone who used to believe in law." Then he turned and left. That night, June stood in the barn, staring at the horse she'd once stolen. Its mane had grown wild. Its eyes were tired, but kind. She pressed her forehead to its neck. "I didn't mean to bring war here," she whispered. Thatcher appeared at her side. "It was already here, just needed a reason to show its teeth." She turned to him. "What are we going to do?" He looked toward the hills. "I think we ride." They packed light, food, water, 1 change of clothes each, the marriage papers. 2 weapons apiece. Thatcher loaded the Spencer, handed June the double barrel. "We won't get far," she said. "We don't need far, just high ground." She looked at him. "You're planning something." "I'm planning not to die on my porch," he said. "That count?" By morning, they were gone. The ranch behind them, silent, empty, still standing. The windows were shuttered, the doors locked. They rode west, into the mouth of the hills, where the sky hung lower, and the road vanished. They didn't speak much. The horses carried them higher, through thorn scrub and dust and bones of animals that hadn't made it. By noon, they reached the overlook. An old hunting spot Thatcher hadn't visited since before Eliza died. The ledge gave them view of the ranch, the distant fence line, and the thin rising trail of smoke. Fresh, deliberate. "They're at the barn," June said. Thatcher raised the spyglass. 4 riders, all armed, one with a jug of kerosene. "They're gonna burn it," she said. Thatcher didn't answer, just watched, then lowered the glass. "They think we're inside." "That's good." June blinked. "That's good?" "I wired the barn. If they light it, the back door'll blow clean through. Might take one of 'em with it." Her mouth dropped. "Open." "You set a trap?" He nodded. "Bell's got hired hands. They're not loyal. You scare 'em bad enough, they scatter." She looked at him differently then. "You used to be someone else, didn't you?" He met her eyes. "I still am." The explosion came 30 minutes later, a sudden bloom of fire. One of the men went flying. The horses screamed. The rest scattered, galloping away in chaos. June ducked instinctively. You think that's enough? No, he said, but now they know I ain't bluffing. They spent the night in the hills, wrapped in wool, taking turns keeping watch. June rested her head against his shoulder once. He didn't move. When the stars came out, she whispered, "What happens if we lose the ranch?" Thatcher exhaled slow. "Then we build something else." "Together?" He looked down at her. "Yeah," he said. "If you still want to." She nodded against him. "I do." At dawn, they rode back. Smoke curled in lazy spirals from the barn's rear corner. The roof had caved partially. A few chickens pecked nervously at the ash. Inside, the damage was bad, but not total. Thatcher found the rifle still intact. June found her locket on the floor, soot-smeared but whole. They stood together in the doorway, side by side. "We rebuild?" she asked. He nodded. "And this time, we build it our way." She reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. The sun rose over a wounded barn, painting gold across blackened timber and soot-stained earth. The chickens were restless, but alive. The horses had returned from their hiding place in the foothills, snorting and stomping with nerves still raw. June stepped into the yard, barefoot, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She turned slowly, letting her eyes take in the wreckage. Half the barn was gone. The tool wall had collapsed. One of the stalls was scorched through, and the old feeding trough had cracked straight down the middle, but the house still stood. So did the porch, the roof, the fences, mostly, and Thatcher. He emerged from behind the barn carrying a hammer in one hand and a length of fresh plank over his shoulder. His face was streaked with dirt and ash, but his steps were steady. "Breakfast is ready," June called softly. He nodded, adjusting the plank. "We'll eat when this wall stops sagging." June didn't argue. She disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a jar of water and a half-loaf of bread. She set them on a stool beside him and leaned against the post. "Was this what your life looked like before?" He paused mid-swing. "Before Eliza?" She nodded. He set the hammer down and leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "No. Back then it was horses, hired hands, a bell on the back porch for supper, laughter in the kitchen." He looked around. "Now it's just us." June stepped forward, placed her hand gently over his. "That's not nothing." They worked side by side all morning. Thatcher sawed and hammered. June stacked unburned boards, sorted through nails, and swept soot from the dirt floor. Her hands blistered. Her dress tore at the hem. She didn't complain once. By midday, the new beam was in place. The barn stood straighter. It wasn't fixed, but it wasn't falling anymore. Thatcher poured 2 tin cups of coffee and handed one to her. "You ever build anything?" he asked. June sipped. "Only memories." He looked over at her. "Then let's build new ones." She smiled behind the rim of her cup. They took the rest of the day for the house. June scrubbed soot from the porch planks. Thatcher patched the window that had cracked from the blast. Together they hung a new curtain in the kitchen, one June had stitched from a spare flour sack. By sunset, the place looked less like a war zone and more like a home. They sat on the steps, exhausted. June leaned her head on his shoulder. "Are we safe?" Thatcher didn't answer right away. "No one's ever safe." "But we're harder to burn now." She nodded. "Then I'll sleep easy." That night it rained again, a gentle drizzle that washed ash from the grass and soot from the stone. June listened to the rhythm of it from her bed, one hand over the locket she kept beneath her pillow. Across the hall, Thatcher sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the Spencer rifle. He hadn't fired it in years before this week. Now the wood was worn again, the metal warm from constant cleaning. He set it aside and reached for something buried deep in the drawer, an envelope sealed years ago, Eliza's handwriting on the front. He didn't open it. Not yet, at dawn. June found a letter pinned to the barn door, a single page, no envelope, folded and stabbed in place with a knife. "You've made your point, Cole. But this ain't over. If the law won't take her, I'll find someone who will. You can't hide behind sentiment forever." CB June read it twice, then walked inside and handed it to Thatcher without a word. He read it once, crumpled it, threw it into the stove. "You believe him?" she asked. He nodded. "Cyrus ain't the type to bluff," June swallowed. "Then what do we do?" "We finish the burn, strengthen the doors, pack supplies. If he wants a siege, he's going to find a fort." The next 2 days passed in furious motion. Thatcher rode to a nearby ranch, Ben Halver's place, 10 miles east, brought back 3 new boards, a sack of oats, and a pair of rusted iron hinges. June made soap, repaired the well rope, organized the root cellar until her hands were raw. They spoke little, but each movement was louder than words. On the 3rd night, June found Thatcher asleep on the porch, hat over his face, rifle leaning against the rail. She draped a quilt over him, then sat beside him, watching the stars. On the 4th day, they received a visitor. A woman. She came alone, on a dapple-gray horse, wearing a riding skirt stained with dust and a pistol at her hip. She dismounted without a word and walked straight to the porch. June met her halfway. The woman extended a hand. "Name's Mabel Cross, used to run a schoolhouse near Denton. Left after my husband died in a mining collapse." June took her hand. "You here for something?" Mabel smiled faintly. "I'm here because someone said Cyrus Bell's about to start a war." Thatcher appeared on the porch, arms crossed. "And you want to help?" "I want to witness," Mabel said, "and maybe put a bullet in the right man if the time comes." Thatcher's eyebrow rose. Mabel shrugged. "I don't like bullies." That evening they made space for Mabel in the barn loft. She laid out her bedroll beside the repaired beam and rolled a cigarette from a pouch tied to her belt. "You trust her?" June asked. Thatcher sat sharpening his knife again. "No, but she ain't with Bell. That much I can tell." June sat beside him. "What about us? What about us? I trust you." He looked at her. "You shouldn't," he said. "I'm not what you think." She held his gaze. "Then show me who you are." Thatcher said nothing, but that night he moved her bedroll into his room, and when she didn't stop him, he let it stay. The morning air was too still. No bird song, no rustling in the trees, just the sound of the wind brushing over the scorched barn wood like it was afraid to touch too hard. June stood in the doorway, brushing her hair with slow strokes. The house smelled of fresh coffee, gun oil, and something else, expectation. Something was coming. She could feel it in the way her stomach sat heavy, in the way Mabel cleaned her pistol twice before breakfast. Thatcher stood in the yard, shirt off, sweat, clinging to his back as he drove a new fence post into the hard-packed dirt. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the work had already begun. June stepped down from the porch, a canteen in her hand. "You don't have to finish it today," she said. He drove the post deeper, then leaned on the sledgehammer, breath short. "I'm not finishing it for today," he said. "I'm finishing it for when they come." She handed him the water. He drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and glanced at her. "How's the root cellar?" "Full enough for a week. 2, if we don't get fancy." He nodded. "And Mabel?" "She's gone scouting." Thatcher's jaw worked. "She shouldn't go alone." She said she was used to it, and besides. June gave a half-smile. "She walks like a woman who's never asked permission." Thatcher chuckled, soft and brief. "Sounds familiar." Mabel returned by mid-afternoon. She came in from the ridgeline, dust in her teeth, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat. "They've moved closer," she said as she stepped down. "Cyrus and 4 others set up a camp on Jeb Keller's old plot, less than a mile from here." Thatcher frowned. "Thought Jeb sold that land?" "He did. Cyrus bought it last winter. Quiet deal. No one thought anything of it." June stepped forward. "He's boxing us in." Mabel nodded. "He's laying claim, fence lines, water access. If he controls the land around you, he can argue in court you're squatting." "Even with the marriage papers?" June asked. Mabel looked at her. "You think courts listen to women out here?" June didn't answer. That night Thatcher spread a map across the table. He used an old bullet casing to mark their property line. Mabel placed pebbles for where Cyrus's men had been sighted. "He's not coming for a gunfight," she said. "Not yet. He wants to make you look like the threat." Thatcher stared at the map. "Then we need someone who'll tell the other." Sighed. June glanced up. "Who'd listen?" "There's a reporter," Thatcher said. "Lives in Dry Hollow. Writes for the Western Sentinel. Old friend of Eliza's." "You think he'd come?" June asked. Thatcher stood. "I think if I tell him there's a woman being hunted for choosing freedom, he'll want to put ink to it." He rode out at first light. Left June with Mabel, 2 rifles and the shotgun, promised to be back before dusk. She didn't argue, but she watched him ride off like a part of her had gone with him. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked after he was gone. Mabel was cleaning fish by the fire pit, knife moving smooth and sure. "What?" "Waiting, not knowing." Mabel smiled, without looking up. "No, but you learn to live beside it, like a neighbor you don't like but can't make leave." June sat beside her. "You think he'll come back?" "I think Thatcher Cole is a man who finishes what he starts." Thatcher reached Dry Hollow just before noon. The town was dustier than he remembered. A few shops boarded up, a few boys tossing rocks at a rusty can. But the newspaper office was still there, the Western Sentinel, painted in fading red across the front window. He dismounted and stepped inside. A bell rang. The smell of ink and tobacco clung to the air. Behind the counter, a tall man in suspenders looked up. "Thatcher Cole," he said. "I'll be damned." "Hello, Benjamin. Been 6 years." "Closer to 7, Thatcher said. "I need a favor." Benjamin gestured toward a chair. "When you ask like that, it's either a wedding or a funeral." Thatcher sat. "Could be both." He told him everything. Not all the details, not the tender ones, but enough. About June, about Cyrus, Belle, about the fire, the threat, the letter pinned with a knife. Benjamin listened, nodding slowly. "Is she really your wife?" Thatcher met his eyes. "She is now." Benjamin folded his hands. "You want me to write a story? Make the town care." "I want the truth on paper, so when Belle comes, people know who the hell he is." The journalist leaned back. "That'll put a target on my back." "Then aim it here instead," Thatcher said. Benjamin smiled. "Still full of grit, Cole. Fine. I'll write out tomorrow. Bring a camera. Maybe we give this girl a voice." Back at the ranch, the day passed slow. June and Mabel reinforced the shutters. They filled buckets at the well. Every sound, a bird, a creak, a shift of wind, sent June's heart jumping. At sundown, they saw the dust trail. One rider, coming fast. June stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but it was Thatcher, alone. He slid off the horse, dust-coated and exhausted. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Benjamin's coming tomorrow. We tell the truth. Let the paper carry it farther than our voices can." June smiled faintly. "You still believe in truth?" He touched her face, just once, gently. "I believe in you." That night, they ate around the fire. Fish, bread, coffee that tasted of ash and boiled patience. June watched Thatcher across the firelight. His face was softer now, not unscarred, but quieter. A man who'd stopped running from his ghosts long, enough to make room for something else. Later, when the stars bloomed and the crickets sang, he took her hand and led her inside. There were no vows, no preacher, just breath skin, and the quiet kind of love that doesn't ask for permission. By the time Benjamin Hart arrived the next morning, the ranch had already been awake for hours. Thatcher was in the yard splitting wood, every swing of the axe echoing like punctuation. June was gathering eggs from the hens that had finally settled. After the fire, and Mabel was perched on the fence with a rifle across her lap, scanning the horizon as if it owed her answers. Benjamin's horse kicked up a cloud of dust as he crested the ridge. He wore a vest lined with pencils, a rolled notebook in one pocket, and a camera strapped to the saddle. He rode like a man who'd been watching over his shoulder for years. June met him halfway. "You're Benjamin?" He tipped his hat. "Reporter. Listener. Occasionally a bad cook. You must be June." She nodded. "You're early." Trouble rarely waits for afternoon. He dismounted, tied his horse to the post, and scanned the property. "Looks better than I expected." "You should have seen it a week ago," June said. "I intend to," Benjamin replied. He asked questions with the patience of a man who'd made his living off secrets. He listened more than he spoke, scribbled down words when they mattered, and didn't flinch at the ugly parts. He asked June to sit for a portrait. She wore her shawl, brushed the ash from her dress, and stood in the doorway of the half-burned barn, not smiling, not soft, but steady. The camera flashed once. Benjamin lowered it, then said quietly, "They'll see you, even if they don't believe you. Yet." June's voice was calm. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to know." Thatcher didn't speak much that morning. He hammered a new board to the chicken coop and oiled the hinges of the cellar door. But when Benjamin finally approached him, he didn't turn away. "She told me what you did," Benjamin said. "Married her to keep her safe." "I married her because it was right," Thatcher replied. "And now?" Thatcher looked toward the barn where June and Mabel were repainting the back wall with what was left of a half-frozen bucket. "Now," he said, "I'd fight to keep her here." By afternoon, Benjamin had what he needed. He packed his notes, folded the camera into its case, and strapped his gear to the horse. "I'll print it by Thursday," he said. "Front page. I'll make sure people know what Cyrus Bell really is." Thatcher gave a short nod. "Appreciate it." Benjamin paused, one boot already in the stirrup. "You know this won't stop him, right?" Thatcher met his eyes. "No, but it'll make sure when he tries again, he has to answer for it." Benjamin smiled. "Still fighting windmills, Cole." "I just don't like bullies," Thatcher said. That night, June found Thatcher alone by the fence line. The sky was deep blue, stars already lighting, like someone had taken a match to velvet. She leaned beside him, arms folded. "What are you thinking?" He nodded toward the horizon. "Benjamin's story won't keep him back. Not for long." "I know," he looked at her. "But you still want to stay?" June nodded. "There's no safer place than beside a man who knows what he's willing to protect." He let that sit in the air, then said, "If we leave, he wins. If we stay, he might kill us." She turned to him. "Then we stay. And we live loud enough to make it cost him." 2 days passed. The barn stood taller now. The smell of soot had faded. The hens were laying again. Even the wind seemed to pass over the ranch with more respect, but June could feel it, the lull, before something broke. Then, just after noon, a boy rode in from town, maybe 13, skinny and freckled. With a newspaper tucked under his arm, he didn't dismount, just handed the folded paper to Mabel and kicked the horse back toward the trail before anyone could ask his name. They gathered on the porch. June unfolded it. The Western Sentinel. Front page. Headline in bold. Mail-order bride fought to be free and found shelter behind a rancher's rifle. Underneath was the photo. June, back straight, eyes fierce, standing in front of the barn that nearly burned her alive. There were quotes, descriptions of Cyrus Bell, notes on the sheriff's resignation, mentions of a town caught between power and principle. "She's in the wind now," Mabel said, tapping the photo. "Can't cage a woman once the world's seen her fight." Thatcher folded the paper and set it on the table. "They'll come sooner now," he said. June met his gaze. "Then we'll be ready sooner." That night there were no words for what they shared, no ceremony, no vows, just touch, silence. The quiet clatter of armor being removed one piece at a time. Thatcher traced the scar on June's palm where a glass had split her skin during the wedding she never finished. She touched the line across his shoulder where a bullet had once passed through on some nameless ridge long before she come. They didn't make promises. They made space. At dawn, a single rider came down the ridge. Not Cyrus, not a stranger, a woman. She rode hard, hair wild, face streaked with tears and dust. Her horse was lathered and frantic. June stepped out, hand on the shotgun. The woman slid off the saddle and dropped to her knees. "They took my daughter," she gasped. "Cyrus Bell's men said she was mine but not my husband's. Said they were making a point." Mabel rushed forward. Thatcher moved slower, calmer. He knelt beside the woman. "What's her name?" he asked. "Clara," the woman wept. "She's 10. June looked at him. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." He stood. "No," he said. "I'm thinking worse." The woman's name was Nadine. She came from a farmstead 3 valleys east, barely held together by fence wire and fading hope. She'd married young, too young, to a man who grew hard before he grew old. When her daughter Clara was born, the timing didn't match the wedding ring. Rumors bloomed. Her husband drank more, then left. Cyrus Bell's men had passed through 3 days ago. They said it was about the law, Nadine told them, tears drying on her dirt-smudged cheeks. Said illegitimacy breeds defiance. Said Clara didn't belong under my roof. Thatcher stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. June sat beside Nadine, rubbing her back in slow, steady circles. "They had no papers?" she asked. Nadine shook her head. "Just smiles, the cruel kind, and guns." Mabel stepped into the doorway, rifle slung over her shoulder. "He's sending a message." Thatcher nodded. "And we're going to send one back." They left. That evening, Thatcher, Mabel, and Nadine. June wanted to go. She argued, but Thatcher pulled her aside, voice low. "You stay here. You're the story now. If Bell lays a trap, he'll use you as bait. If he finds the ranch empty, he'll think, 'We ran.'" June's eyes burned. "And if he finds it full of fire?" Thatcher touched her cheek. "Then he'll finally understand what it means to burn for something worth keeping." They rode into the valley at dusk. Nadine's directions led them to a grove near the dried-out creek bed. There, an old grain barn leaned crooked in the fading light, held up by prayer and neglect. Mabel dismounted first, pistol drawn. "Quiet." Thatcher slid down beside her. The horses were tied to the mesquite. Nadine crouched behind a low wall, fists trembling. From inside the barn came faint noises, wood shifting, a low whimper, the clink of a chain. Mabel motioned forward. They crept through the tall grass. Inside, lit by the flicker of a single oil lamp, stood a man with a whip on his belt and a smirk on his face. Behind him, Clara, small, shoeless, eyes wide and rimmed, with red, sat tied to a post like a goat. Mabel moved to flank. Thatcher raised the rifle, stepped into the doorway, and said only one word, "Stop." The man turned and froze. "Cole," he muttered. "Hell, I didn't know." "You didn't ask. I was following orders." "Where's the paper?" The man licked his lips. "What paper?" "You're taking a child. You need papers. We were told." "You were told wrong." Thatcher leveled the rifle. "Step aside. Walk away." "Now!" The man hesitated. Then Mabel stepped into view, pistol aimed at his heart. He dropped the whip. Clara ran to Nadine the moment the rope fell loose. The sob that tore out of her was half relief, half fear. Nadine clutched her so tight it looked like she was holding on to breath itself. Thatcher watched. His jaw worked once, like he wanted to say something, and swallowed it down instead. Mabel cuffed the man's hands and tied him to the post. "We'll send word to Dry Hollow. They'll collect him for unlawful detainment. Or let him rot," Thatcher muttered. They returned to the ranch by dawn. June was waiting on the porch, shawl pulled tight, shotgun across her lap. When she saw Clara asleep in Nadine's arms, she exhaled for the first time in hours. "She okay?" she asked. "She will be," Thatcher said. Clara stayed with them that week. June gave her her old shawl. Nadine cleaned the guest room. Mabel taught her how to load a revolver, not to use it, just to know. And Thatcher carved her a wooden horse from a cedar branch near the east fence. One night, June found Clara in the loft, staring at the stars through a missing plank. "Do they know?" the girl whispered. "The stars? When something bad happens?" June sat beside her. "Maybe. Or maybe they just wait for someone to come home. The article had spread. Another paper reprinted it. Then another. A week later, a traveling preacher stopped by, brought a Bible, a sack of beans, and said, "I read about you in Junction Flats. My wife said I had to come see if you were real." He left with tears in his eyes and a promise to preach truth louder than the men who tried to bury. It then came a schoolteacher, a war widow, a tanner's apprentice. One by one, folks trickled in. Some stayed for supper, some just sat on the porch and told stories. Thatcher didn't smile much, but he listened, and he started to believe that maybe not all at once, but little by little, the story was becoming stronger than the fire. Then, one night, June stood in the yard and looked up at the stars. Thatcher joined her, holding a mug of coffee and silence. "He hasn't come back," she said. "He's waiting." "For what?" "For something worse than revenge." She turned. "To him." "What's worse?" Thatcher's voice was a whisper. "Proof he lost." The moon that night was a ragged coin, half bitten and hanging low over the ridge. The land slept quiet, but not peacefully. The wind shifted eastward, dry and sharp, stirring loose shingles and brittle grass like it had a warning on its breath. June stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight around her middle. She wasn't cold, not exactly. But something inside her had begun to pace. Across the yard, Thatcher checked the gate again. Third time in an hour. He didn't say anything, just rattled the latch, tested the bar, then moved on to the lantern. By the barn. He was restless, too. Mabel leaned against the fence rail with her boots planted and a rifle cradled in her arms. She watched the tree line like a gambler who knew the river card was going to be bad. Inside the house, Clara slept with her arms around a stuffed rabbit someone had stitched from old burlap and cotton scraps. Nadine had fallen asleep with one, hand still clutching the quilt, her eyes dark-ringed from too many days of watching too many men walk into her life like they owned it. June looked at Thatcher when he came back from his slow patrol. "He's coming," she said. Thatcher nodded. "Soon." They met at the table that morning. No one was hungry, but they ate anyway. Eggs, stale biscuits, beans, and black coffee. Fuel more than food. Thatcher laid the new map out flat. He'd drawn it himself. Clean lines, hand-labeled, every tree and trail noted. "He's not coming alone," he said. We saw what he sent for a 10-year-old girl. He'll bring more for a woman who embarrassed him in print." "Town's quiet," Mabel added. "Too quiet. Folks see him for what he is now, but they're still afraid of what he owns." "Is." "He's still buying land?" June asked. Mabel nodded. "East of the Arroyo, South Ridge. He's closing the circle." Thatcher tapped a mark on the map. "This here, these hills, still open. If he pushes any further, he'll need a claim dispute filed." "He hasn't yet." "Then what's he waiting for?" Nadine asked. Thatcher's voice dropped. "For us to break the law first. He wants justification." June stared at the map. "So we give him nothing." "No," Thatcher said. "We give him something he didn't expect." They spent the next 2 days building barricades, not outwardly defensive, but smart. Thatcher reinforced the interior of the barn walls with layered hay and spare timber. June helped stack stone behind the chicken coop, creating a low shield. Mabel taught Nadine how to fire a 6-shot Colt without flinching. They worked in rhythm, in silence, in unity. The ranch, once isolated, now pulsed with purpose. Thatcher barely slept. Neither did June. Every rustle made them pause. Every wind gust set hands near triggers. On the third night, Thatcher pulled a folded letter from a drawer. He stared at it for a long while. June sat down beside him. "Eliza?" He nodded. "Wrote this the day before she died. I never opened it." June's voice was soft. "Why?" "Because I thought if I didn't read it, it wouldn't be a goodbye." June put her hand on his. "You don't have to read it now," she said, "but I hope you do, someday." He held it like a confession, then tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. That evening, a rider came to the edge of the property, alone. Hands raised, they watched him from behind cover. He wore no gun, no badge, but a bright white scarf fluttered from his shoulder, a sign of parley. Thatcher walked out alone. The man held a rolled paper and a bottle of whiskey. "Name's Finch," he said. "Cyrus sent me." Thatcher didn't. "Shake his hand." Finch offered the paper. "Official offer. Property trade. He gets the ranch, you get twice its value in gold." Thatcher didn't take it. Finch shrugged and uncorked the bottle. "I'm just a messenger. You want to hear the terms?" Thatcher finally took the paper, read it, then tore it in half and handed it back. "Tell Bell this land's not for sale." "Not today. Not ever." Finch sighed. "He figured you'd say that." "He send anything else?" Finch hesitated, then said, "He said to remind you, he's not the law, but the law doesn't stop him." Thatcher leaned in, voice low. "Tell Cyrus I'm not the law either, but I'll stop him anyway." They expected the attack at night. But it came at dawn. Mabel saw the first flash of movement from the ridge. Riders, maybe 6, maybe 8, spread wide, kicking up dust. No formation, no fanfare, just speed. "They're coming," she said. Thatcher pulled his coat on, buckled the gun belt, handed June her shotgun. "You stay behind the kitchen wall," he said. "Stone's thick. If you hear 3 shots in a row, that means go." "Go where?" "Back room, trap door, root cellar." She grabbed his sleeve. "Don't die out there." He looked at her for a long beat, then kissed her forehead and walked out into the morning light. They came fast. First 2 broke toward the barn. Mabel dropped one with a shoulder shot. The second ducked and looped around the corral. Thatcher waited until he had a clear line, then fired once, clean through the rider's thigh. The man dropped screaming. Nadine and Clara were in the root cellar, door barred. June waited inside the house, shotgun tight to her shoulder, listening to every footfall like it was thunder. A third rider came toward the porch. June fired through the window. He flew backward and didn't get up. The firefight lasted 10 minutes. Then it was quiet, too quiet. Mabel crouched near the barn wall, blood running from a graze on her temple. Thatcher had taken cover behind the watering trough. Then, hooves, slow. Deliberate Cyrus Bell, riding in alone. He wore a long black coat, no hat, silver buckle gleaming. He dismounted without a word and walked forward. "Cole," he called. Thatcher stepped into view. "It's over," Cyrus said. "Not for me. You got 3 of my men shot, 2 dead. They came armed. They came to talk." "You sent whiskey and lies," Thatcher said. "Now you send graves." Cyrus stepped closer. "You really going to throw away your life for some saloon runaway?" "She's not the one hiding behind hired men," Cyrus smiled. "I came alone." "Now didn't I?" Thatcher raised his rifle. "Too bad you won't leave that way." But then, a voice from behind the house. "Marshal." They all turned. From the eastern road came Dust and Lawman, 5 riders strong. At the front was the man Thatcher hadn't seen in over a year, U.S. Marshal Eli Beckett, clean coat, clear eyes, and a badge that still meant something. He dismounted, rifle in hand. "Bell," he said, "drop your weapon." Cyrus's eyes went cold. "You don't have jurisdiction here." Beckett handed over a folded paper. "Federal warrant for intimidation, arson, abduction of a minor, and unlawful land seizure." Cyrus stared at the paper, then at Thatcher. "You did this?" Thatcher nodded. "You made me the villain. You made yourself that a long time ago." Cyrus lunged for his pistol. He didn't make it. One shot rang out sharp, final. Beckett's rifle. Right through the gut. Cyrus dropped, bleeding into the dust. June ran to the porch. Thatcher met her halfway. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He pulled her into his arms, tight, fierce, like she was the only thing in the world. That still made sense. That night, after the marshals had ridden out with Cyrus in chains, after Mabel's wound was cleaned and Nadine had finally let herself cry, June walked out to the yard where Thatcher sat staring at the stars. She handed him Eliza's letter. "I think it's time," she said. He opened it slowly. "Read." "And when?" He finished. He folded it carefully. "She said she hoped I'd find someone who would remind me who I was. June knelt beside him. "Do you think you have?" He looked at her, eyes soft, voice steady. "I know I have." The dust didn't settle overnight. It hung in the air like something that needed to be earned, not given. Even after Cyrus Bell was hauled off in irons, even after the marshals disappeared into the horizon, the quiet that followed wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was the beginning of it. The ranch felt different in the morning. Not healed, just not bleeding anymore. Thatcher stood in the yard, staring at the broken fence line. 3 posts were still split from the fight. Blood in the dirt had already dried. Clara's stuffed rabbit lay half buried under the porch, forgotten. In the chaos, he didn't move, not for a long time. June came up behind him, hair unbraided, her shawl pulled tight. She slid her arm through his without a word. Together they stood at the edge of the place that had nearly come undone. "You gonna fix it?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Every nail, every board." She squeezed his arm. "We'll do it together." Mabel left that afternoon. She packed light. Just a roll, her rifle, and a letter from a widow in Harper Creek who said the town needed a school teacher with a backbone. She hugged June first. "You ever need someone to come shoot lies in the teeth again," Mabel said, "you just send for or me." June smiled. "If I ever need to build an army of stubborn women, you'll be the first I find." Mabel turned to Thatcher. "You've got something rare," she said. "I know. Don't waste it." "I won't." And then she was gone, just like she came, dust and silence in her wake. The weeks that followed were made of small things. Thatcher rebuilt the porch rail. June planted carrots near the south fence. Nadine and Clara moved into the small bunkhouse, fixed it up with curtains and dried flowers. The chickens laid more. The horses calmed, and for the first time since June had climbed down from the hayloft in a rain-soaked wedding dress, the house began to feel like something more than a shelter. It felt like a beginning. One morning, Clara brought home a stray. Dog matted, limping, missing one ear. She named him Sheriff. Thatcher grumbled at first, but by sundown, the dog was asleep on the porch, head on his boot. June just smiled. "Looks like you've been deputized." Thatcher scratched the mutt behind the ears. "Long as he doesn't ask for wages." One evening, Thatcher found June in the loft of the barn, sitting cross-legged with a half-finished journal in her lap. "You writing it down?" he asked. She nodded. "All of it." He sat beside her. "For who?" "For me," she said. "But maybe one day someone else who needs it." He looked around. "This loft saw the start of something, didn't it?" June smiled. "It saw—" "The moment I stopped running," he touched her chin gently. "I saw you before you said a word. You were more alive than anything I'd known in years." She leaned her forehead to his. "I thought you were going to shoot me." "I almost did." They both laughed, quiet, honest. In town, the article was still passed around, reprinted in 3 states. The sheriff's office reopened with a younger man who made it clear he didn't serve gold or gossip. Cyrus Bell's estate was tied up in legal knots, and his name was whispered like a warning instead of a threat. People began to wave when they saw Thatcher in the general store. June received letters, 5 in the first month, 2 from women, 3 from girls, all of them with some version of the same message. "Thank you for standing." She wrote back to everyone. They held a small supper one Saturday. Neighbors, strangers, folks who remembered the fight or just wanted to hear about it firsthand. June baked bread. Nadine made stew. Thatcher barbecued a rabbit. Clara danced with the dog. There was laughter, real and warm, and for once, no one asked about scars. One of the ranchers, a widower named Daniel Hogue, stood to toast. "To the woman who ran," he said, lifting his glass, "and to the man who stood still long enough to catch her." June flushed. Thatcher smirked. And the whole table clinked glasses like it meant something, because it did. Later that night, June found Thatcher staring at the stars again. "I used to think quiet meant something was broken," she said. "Now it just means we've earned the stillness." He nodded. "I used to think grief was the last thing I'd ever feel. Now it's just something that walks beside me." She leaned against him. "Do you still see her, Eliza?" He was quiet a moment. Sometimes. But she's farther now, like she's walking ahead instead of waiting. June reached for his hand. I'm not here to replace her. I know, but I am here to stay. He closed his fingers around hers. That's all I ever needed. They built a new gate in the spring, stronger. Wood, iron hinges, carved into the top plank by June's hand, were 3 words. This is home. Below it, she added a date. The day she arrived. Not the day she married him. Not the day they buried the past. The day she climbed down from the hayloft, soaked to the skin, heart in her throat, and dared to knock on the door of a man who had forgotten how to answer. A year passed. The fields grew, the fence held, the barn was rebuilt stronger, and one morning June placed his hand on her belly and smiled with tears in her eyes. He didn't speak, just pulled her close, forehead to hers, heart beating like a drum. That had found its rhythm again. Sometimes people still came by the ranch, to ask questions, to shake hands, to offer thanks. They never stayed long, but they always left different. And the story lived on, not just in newsprint, but in porch whispers and campfire songs, and in the kind of silence that holds weight. The silence that says, a man can change. A woman can stand. And when both do it together, there ain't a storm strong enough to tear it down. The letter came by stagecoach, no sender listed, just a folded piece of heavy parchment delivered by a tired-looking boy who didn't wait around for a tip. June opened it on the porch while Thatcher trimmed the front hedgerow. Her eyes scanned. The handwriting, familiar in its arrogance. Neat, exact, cold. She said nothing at first, just folded it, walked down the steps and handed it to him. Thatcher read it, once, then again. Finally he looked up. He's dying, June nodded. That's what it says. Cyrus Bell had been transferred east to a federal holding facility outside Abilene. Some kind of infection in the gut, what the doctors called a slow bleed. No cure, no comfort, just a ticking clock. And now he wanted to see them. I won't go, June said that night, her voice steady. You don't have to, Thatcher replied. They sat across from each other at the table, the oil lamp flickering between them. But you're thinking about it, she added. He didn't answer. She leaned forward. Why? Thatcher stared at the letter. Because men like him die, thinking they still own the last word. June's brow furrowed. And you want to take it from him? No, Thatcher said softly. I want to see if he ever knew what it was. 2 days later, he saddled Ora. Up June stood in the barn doorway, arms crossed, watching him cinch the straps. You sure? No. Then why are you going? Thatcher adjusted the rifle scabbard. Because there's a man in a cold bed who's got nothing left but ghosts. I just want him to know mine stopped chasing me. She stepped forward, kissed him hard, then whispered, Come back to me. The ride to Abilene took the better part of 2 days. Dusty trails, flat skies, lone cactus casting long shadows across dry creek beds. Thatcher didn't rush. He thought about the first time he saw June, curled up in his hayloft, rain-wet and wild-eyed, clutching a Bible like it could undo the world. He thought about Eliza, about the letter, about the strange way grief and love could occupy the same corner of a man's chest and never throw punches. And he thought about Cyrus Bell, the man who nearly ruined everything, and now lay waiting to speak one last time. The prison was gray, square, silent. The guards let him in with quiet nods. They knew his name. Third cell, one said. He's been asking. The hall smelled like iron and mildew. Echoes clanged like regrets. Thatcher stepped inside the narrow space. Cyrus Bell lay on a cot, pale as parchment, eyes sunken, body thinner than memory allowed. The bravado was gone. What remained was a man who had finally outrun himself. Well, Cyrus rasped, you showed up. Thatcher nodded. Don't make me regret it. The corners of Cyrus's lips twitched. Still got bite. You wanted to talk. Cyrus coughed deep, rattling. Wanted to look you in the eye before I go. You could have done that. In court? No. Court was noise. This... He coughed again, blood at the corners of his mouth. This is something else. Thatcher leaned against the wall, arms folded. Say what you came to say. Cyrus looked at him. That girl, June, she never feared me. Not really. That's what broke me. Thatcher stayed silent. I thought money bought obedience, that reputation bought silence. But she just kept choosing something else. Freedom, Thatcher said. Cyrus nodded, weakly. I kept wondering what it is I had that made folks kneel, and what you had that made her stand. I listened. She talked, and I stayed, Thatcher finished. Cyrus closed his eyes. I was wrong. A long pause. Then, quietly, I never said that before. Not to anyone. Thatcher stepped closer. What do you want from me, Cyrus? Nothing, he whispered. Not any more. Just wanted to look the man in the eye. Who didn't become me. Thatcher rode out that night. He didn't look back. Back at the ranch, June was planting squash. Clara helped, pressing seeds into the earth with her thumbs. Sheriff, the dog, dug shallow holes 2 feet behind her and promptly sat in them like he'd invented the process. When she heard the hooves, she stood. When she saw him, she didn't run. She waited. Thatcher dismounted, covered in trail dust. Face unreadable? You all right? She asked. He nodded. He's gone? Already? No, he said, but he knew he would be. They walked together to the porch. She didn't ask what Cyrus had said, and he didn't offer it. But after supper, he pulled the old whiskey bottle from the shelf, the one he hadn't touched since Eliza's funeral. He poured 2 glasses. 2. The end of something, he said. June raised her glass. And to the beginning. They clinked and drank. 3 weeks later, word arrived by telegraph. Cyrus Bell had died in his sleep. No last words, no family present. The government auctioned off his holdings. Most were bought by men and women who'd once feared him, and no longer did. His land was broken up. His house was turned into a school. His name faded from the stories, except as a footnote to someone else's courage. That Sunday, June sat. In the front pew of a church she hadn't known existed until a month before. She wore blue. Clara beside her. Nadine singing off-key in the back. Thatcher didn't step inside. But he stood by the door, hat in hand, listening. The sermon wasn't about fire or damnation. It was about mercy and the strange way it sometimes comes dressed as a second chance. Afterward, the preacher greeted them all. Tall man, gentle hands. Carried a worn Bible like it had been through 2 wars and still held together with hope. You 2 staying long? He asked. Thatcher glanced at June. We're building something, she said. The preacher smiled. Then, I hope you lay the foundation deep. That night they walked the fence line together. The wind had shifted again, warmer now, tinged with spring. I'm pregnant, June said. Thatcher stopped walking, turned to her. You sure? She nodded. I wanted to wait until you came back. He didn't speak. Just stepped forward and put both hands on her waist, then moved one to her stomach. And he smiled. Not the kind he wore around company, but the kind that came from somewhere deep and honest, like the soil beneath their boots. He whispered something. Against her temple. She never told anyone what it was. But when she held their child for the first time, months later, she said it again. And the boy, quiet, wide-eyed, with her hair and Thatcher's hands, blinked like he already understood. The first flowers came up wild. Not the ones June had planted, those came later, but the unexpected kind. Sprigs of prairie clover along the fence line, a shock of golden daisy near the well. They'd taken root on their own, bold and uninvited. Like the land itself had decided it was time to color in what had gone dull for too long. Thatcher noticed them while fixing the gate latch. He crouched down, ran calloused fingers over soft petals, and said nothing. But that night he brought one inside and set it in a chipped glass beside the window where June sat mending baby clothes. She looked up. "Did you pick that for me?" He didn't answer, but he kissed her forehead and walked away. The house changed in small ways. A second rocking chair on the porch, a cradle in the corner carved from the same cedar he'd once used for fence posts. June's handwriting now filled half a ledger on the kitchen shelf. Lists of supplies, letters to family, journal pages she hadn't decided whether to share or burn, and laughter. Not constant, not loud, but real. Clara laughed first. Something. About the dog chasing its own tail until it spun into the water trough. Nadine laughed next. At dinner, when Thatcher, unintentionally and without apology, called a napkin a belly bib, even Thatcher laughed. Once. Deep and surprised, like he'd forgotten how it sounded. June only smiled, but it reached her eyes in a way it hadn't. Since the day she ran from the church, the baby came in early summer. It wasn't easy. The pain bent her near double. The air was thick with heat, and June's breath came sharp, ragged, caught between sob and prayer. Nadine boiled water. Mabel, who'd ridden back when she got word, cut cloth with a hand that didn't tremble. Even Clara helped, running between rooms with towels and messages. Thatcher sat outside on the porch steps, his hands locked together, head bowed. He didn't pray, but he did wait, and that was close enough. It was a boy, dark hair, light skin, quiet but alert. He blinked up at the world like he'd arrived in the middle of a story and wanted to know how it ended. June held him close, her face wet with sweat and something softer. "He's got your hands," she whispered. To Thatcher, he crouched beside the bed, brushed the boy's cheek with a thumb calloused from wood and war. "He's got your strength," he said back. They named him Elijah. The ranch settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began earlier. Nights stretched longer, crying, feeding, singing, rocking. Thatcher built a shade over the porch. June stitched a sling so she could carry Elijah and still move through her day. Clara took to him instantly, declaring herself his big sister. In every way except blood, and Sheriff, the dog, laid himself under the cradle like it was his new post. Visitors came more often, women who had read the article, men who remembered Eliza, strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to see if it was real. Most didn't stay long, just enough to sit, to listen, to thank. Some left changed, some left weeping. One evening, while Elijah slept in his mother's arms and the world outside softened to twilight, Thatcher walked down to the edge of the south field. He stood there. For a long time, Mabel joined him, arms crossed, watching the golden light fade. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "It's strange." "What is?" "Not looking over my shoulder." Mabel grinned. "You still might, but now it's mostly to make sure the gate's latched and the cows haven't run off." He chuckled, then fell quiet again. "Do you think I did enough?" he asked. Mabel looked sideways at him. "To deserve peace?" He didn't reply. "Just waited." "You loved," she said. "You protected. You let yourself become something other than haunted. That's more than enough." Thatcher nodded. "Thanks." Mabel shrugged. "Besides, your boy's going to be trouble. You'll earn your penance all over again raising him." They held a baptism under the open sky. No church, no preacher, just friends and neighbors. Mabel spoke first, reading from a passage about water and renewal. Then June. She held Elijah in her arms, voice shaking but sure. This child was born of fire and choosing. He is not a symbol of survival, but of beginning, of what comes after the fight. Thatcher said nothing. He just held the boy's hand and wept quietly, the kind of tears men don't cry for pain, but for permission. That night June curled beside him in bed. The house was dark save for the soft glow of a lantern flickering in the hallway. "Elijah will ask someday," she whispered, "where he came from, why things are the way they are." Thatcher didn't open his eyes. "I'll tell him," she continued, "that I was running, that you were standing still, and that the day I stopped, we built something no one could take." He nodded once, barely. "And I'll tell him," she added, that his father was the kind of man who wasn't always sure he deserved love, but never once ran from it when it came. Summer came in full. The squash grew fat on the vine. The fence held through a thunderstorm. The roof didn't leak for once. And Elijah laughed for the first time, a deep gurgling giggle that stopped every adult in the room like a gunshot. June scooped him up, eyes wide. Thatcher grinned and said, "Well, guess we're doing something right." They never wrote another article, never gave another interview, but folks kept coming, some with tears, some with scars, all of them looking for what the coal ranch had somehow become, a place where the wind didn't chase you anymore, where silence didn't mean shame, where a woman could stop running and a man could remember what it meant to begin again. The first frost came early that year. It crept in overnight, painting the grass silver and turning breath into steam. The chickens complained. The dog curled tighter. Elijah, wrapped in 2 blankets, let out one high, offended squeal. Before settling back into June's arms, Thatcher stepped out onto the porch with a tin mug in hand, steam curling from the coffee and from his lips. He stood still for a long while, watching the mist roll over the land. It reminded him of the morning June first arrived. Same hush, same chill, same weight in the air that whispered, "Something's changing." Only this time he wasn't waiting for danger. He was waiting for the day to begin, and it did, slowly, softly, like even the sun was tired. They'd made it through summer with the help of neighbors, Clara's endless curiosity, and June's meticulous planning. The garden had yielded more than expected. The repairs had held. Elijah had outgrown 3 pairs of socks and 4 shirts already. Sheriff, the dog, had grown old too, limping more these days, sleeping longer, but never leaving the baby's side. Nadine had moved into town to help with a new infirmary. She still came out Sundays with a sack of biscuits and complaints about the mayor's manners. Mabel wrote letters from Harper Creek, mostly sarcastic, always filled with warmth. Her latest said she was breaking up schoolyard brawls and hearts in equal measure. Life didn't slow, but it softened. June called it grace. Thatcher called it enough. One night, after Elijah had gone to sleep, June brought out the journal. She'd been keeping since the day she first arrived. She handed it to Thatcher. "I want you to read it." He hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. "It's all there. The fear, the flight, the parts I didn't say aloud." Thatcher sat by the fire and began. He read for over an hour, didn't speak, didn't move. When he finished, he looked at her. His eyes were wet. "You wrote down things I didn't know how to say," he whispered. "I wrote them so I wouldn't forget who I was before you." He reached across and took her hand. "I loved you before I knew your story," he said. "But now I love you deeper for surviving it." She kissed him softly, and nothing else needed to be said. Elijah's first steps came during the first snow. It was mid-afternoon, quiet and white outside. June had laid out blankets by the hearth. Thatcher was chopping wood nearby, half listening. Thika, boy stood, wobbled, grinned, and marched 3 defiant steps before falling back on his bottom with a triumphant squawk. June clapped. Thatcher dropped the axe and ran inside. "He walked?" he asked. June laughed. "He conquered." They lifted him between them and let him try again. By nightfall he was standing steady on his own and aiming straight for the dog's tail. Sheriff looked at the child's side and waddled out of reach. That winter, something strange happened. People kept visiting, not reporters, not gawkers, women, alone, or with children. Sometimes silent, sometimes shaking. All of them carrying something that couldn't be seen: shame, loss, fear. June welcomed them with warm broth and steady eyes. She never asked why they came. She only showed them where the soft blankets were and how to breathe again. One stayed a week, another stayed a month. The ranch became something more than a home. It became safe, and that made all the difference. One particularly bitter morning, a woman named Alice stood at the fence, her hands clenched white. June stepped outside. Wrapped in her coat, Elijah on her hip. Alice looked up. Her voice cracked. "I saw your name in the paper. From last year, I didn't know where else to go." June didn't blink. "You're here now," she said. "That's enough." She brought her inside, fed her, let her cry. Thatcher repaired the spare room. By spring, Alice was smiling again. She didn't stay forever, but when she left, she looked taller, like someone who remembered how to carry her own name. Thatcher and June sat on the porch one night, lanterns glowing behind them. Stars so thick overhead, it felt like the sky had bloomed. He held Elijah in one arm, fast asleep. June rocked gently beside him, feet bare, dress brushing the boards. "He's growing too fast," she whispered. "He's not the only one." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You," he said. "I watched you run once. Now you walk into every day like it owes you something." She chuckled softly. "It does." "What's that?" "Joy." He nodded. "And peace?" June leaned into him. "That too." The wind carried sounds differently out here. Laughter stayed longer. Footsteps echoed farther. And sometimes, when the night was very still, June swore she could hear her old self in the distance. The girl in the wedding dress, breathless and wild, tumbling into a stranger's barn. She didn't mourn her. She honored her. That girl had been brave enough to flee, and this woman, this wife, this mother, this builder, had been brave enough to stay. One Sunday, Thatcher opened the drawer where Eliza's letter had once lived. He took out a new envelope, folded a single page, and added it beside hers. Then he wrote a name on the outside. Elijah Cole. When spring broke through the last of the frost, the earth responded in kind. June's garden flourished. The apricot tree finally bloomed. A calf was born with a crooked tail and a spirit that refused to be penned. The land healed because they let it, and maybe that's all they ever needed to do. Not rebuild what had burned, not avenge what was stolen, but plant something honest in the ashes and stay long enough to see it grow. The ranch was quieter now, not empty, never that, but quieter in the way a story gets once all the shouting is done, once the characters settle into the lives they've fought to build. The fences no longer needed watching every night. The barn roof didn't leak when it rained. The dog no longer barked at every breeze. Thatcher sat on the porch in the evening, Elijah on his knee. The boy was two now, all questions and motion and joy, with grass-stained knees and a laugh that carried over the fields. He held a toy horse in one hand and his father's thumb in the other. The sky ahead of them was wide and golden, the sun sinking behind the hills where trouble used to come from. Now it only brought shadows, soft ones. June stepped out with a cup of coffee in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. She draped it around Thatcher's shoulders, kissed Elijah's hair, then sat beside them. Her dress caught the breeze, swaying gently. "I love this time of day," she murmured. Thatcher glanced at her. "You used to say that made you nervous." "I used to run when the light got low. It felt like the world was closing in." She reached for his hand. "Now it just feels like quiet, like the land exhaling." He nodded, watching the boy giggle at the way his toy horse bucked on the railing. "We've come far," he said. "You more than anyone." "I don't know," he replied. "You're the one who stepped into a stranger's barn with nothing but a name and a prayer." She laughed softly. "I didn't pray." "You didn't?" "No," she said. "Not then. I just looked for light and found yours still burning." They watched the sun disappear below the ridge. The day didn't end all at once. It faded, like a song winding down. In that quiet, June said, "Do you think we're done with the past?" Thatcher took a long breath. "No, but I think the past is done with us." That night, after Elijah was asleep, June went to the old chest near the back room. She pulled out a box she hadn't opened in months. Inside were the things she'd carried from her old life. A broken comb, a letter she never mailed, a piece of torn lace from the wedding dress she'd left behind. She held it up to the lamplight, frayed, yellowed, fragile. Then she reached for the scissors and cut a strip from it. Thin, deliberate. "What are you doing?" Thatcher asked from the doorway. "Finishing something." She tied the lace around Elijah's toy horse. He watched, saying nothing. "You didn't run from that dress," he said. "You carried it farther than most would have dared." "I carried what I needed," she replied, "and I've let go of what I don't." The next day, a rider approached from the west. Not a threat, just an old rancher with sun-beaten skin, and a letter for June. She took it under the porch shade and read it slowly. It was from a girl in Kansas. "I'm 17. My aunt says I should marry a banker who drinks too much. But I read about you. I read what you did. And I think I want to be more than just someone's wife. I want to be my own person. Is it true what they wrote, that you built a home in a stranger's arms?" June read it twice, then wrote back that night. She didn't lie. Time passed, not in leaps, but in the quiet turning of seasons. Thatcher's beard went grayer. June's hands grew calloused from more than stitching. Clara returned one spring, grown, into a young woman with her own stories to tell, and a will stronger than any fence post. She brought books, biscuits, and 2 strays she refused to leave behind. Mabel visited once a year. Nadine came every Sunday. And Elijah. Elijah grew taller, stronger. One morning, he rode the fence line alone just once. When he came back, he said, "It's all there, Pa. Everything's holding." And Thatcher nodded, proud in a way he didn't need to say aloud. Years later, when a young reporter found the ranch, looking to revisit the story, maybe write about what came after, he asked June. What changed? She poured him coffee, sat down, and smiled. Everything and nothing. The man blinked. "Could you explain?" She looked toward the barn, toward the porch, toward the field where her son was now teaching another child to ride. "I ran once," she said, "but someone stood still long enough for me to stop. That was the first change." She paused. "From the mob. Rest? That came from staying. The reporter asked if he could take a photo." Thatcher groaned. "Only if you don't make us smile like fools." So they stood on the porch, June on one side, Thatcher on the other, Elijah between them, holding a bundle of fresh carrots from the garden. No pose, no performance, just family, just home. The picture would one day hang in a town library under a plaque that read, "They built something that held." And on the very last page of June's journal, written in ink faded by time and fingerprints, were 7 words. "The wind never chased me again. Ever."